In the last video, I showed you how you can fully automate your month-end reporting using Power Query. This video, we're going to take that a massive step forward. We're going to be able to create drill down reports and mini dashboards in virtually no time at all and super impress everyone around us. Before we do anything else, make sure you download this spreadsheet. It's fully complete with everything I'm going to do, including all the formulas, the setup, the measures, the Power Queries, everything is in it. Therefore, you can follow along, or if you get stuck or whatever, you can go back and look at what I've done and make sure you've done the same. So go ahead, click your download link in the description. No details required, straight down to your computer. In the last video, we took a load of budget and actual data and pulled it into Power Query to create this report here, which will refresh at a click of a button. We then linked it up to an output format report where you could just change the month, and therefore getting our month-end report down to a few seconds a month. Now, if you didn't watch that, I strongly suggest that you go back and look at that because it will give you a whole load of techniques as to how to get stuff working in Power Query. But assuming that you've already got data in Power Query, or you've got a data table that looks something like that that you can pull into Power Query, then you can just crack on with the method I'm going to go through. Now, what we're going to do is essentially pull everything into a data model. And that will give us so much flexibility to be able to slice and dice the data in Power Pivot and create all sorts of great looking reports that we can turn into dashboards as well. The first thing that we need to do is get our data into the data model. If we go onto the data menu and click on queries and connections, and I'm just going to drag that over here, we'll see our queries. So we right click on that and load to, and we're going to add this to the data model. Now, we might as well click on this only create a connection, because although you might feel it's useful to have it in the table, it's actually going to destroy any references that we've already got. So the report that were created in the previous video is going to be destroyed anyway when we do this. So I'm just going to create only connection and say putting it into the spreadsheet. And when we do that, so it's going to disappear. That could make the spreadsheet run a lot faster anyway. So we're going to now delete that sheet. We're also going to change the current month to only create a connection and add this one to the data menu as well. Data model, sorry. And that way then we'll have the month number and all the output data in the data model. We've got currently actuals and budgets in this data, but we want to create a variance value type as well, because that would just make things a lot easier when we come to dragging and dropping fields around in pivot tables. So we're going to go back into here to our output report table. Opening the back up, we have the value type column here. So what we're going to do is actually pivot by that column. So if we go to the transform and pivot that column, and we'll say that we want value as the values column. So now we basically have two columns with values in, an actual and a budget. You can see some of them have got nulls in. What we need to just do there is we highlight both those columns and we right click and we say replace values, and we'll replace null with a 0 so that we don't have a problem with our mathematics or anything. For a variance, actual, and then we'll hold down control and click on budget, and we're going to do actual minus budget. And if we go to add a column, you can see we have this standard button here. We can do subtract, and that's going to create a column which is one minus the other. You can see in the formula here it's called it subtraction, but we can change that to say variance, hit enter. So now we have our variance column. So I'm going to change all of those by highlighting all three using the shift key, and on the home menu I'm just going to change those to currencies, and then I'm going to actually unpivot those columns again. So unpivot those there, so we now have our actual budget and variance in a single value column, which is what I want. The only thing is it's called it attribute, so I need to rename it back to be called value type. And then when I go to home, I go close and load, and that should just recreate that back into the data model. Okay, so that's actually our data prep done. We're now going to start creating some measures. Measures are basically calculations on that data that we can use inside pivot tables in the Power Pivot model. So these are really, really flexible because it allows us to create things like a measure for actuals, budgets, and variances that we can then chuck against all different fields in pivot tables and create all manner of things that would be very, very difficult to do in a standard pivot table. So the first measure we're going to create is one for the total. If we go to the Power Pivot menu, and incidentally, if you don't have the Power Pivot menu, you should be able to install it easily enough. It just might not be switched on. So just Google that and find out how to switch it on. We go to measures and new measure. We'll get this strange sort of thing saying which table do we want to create it in. So the first one, it doesn't actually matter where you create measures, but I always put them in the table to which they relate. The key thing is we give it a name. And this time we're just going to say it's the sum. And you can see here as a type, you get some examples of the kind of functions that you want to use. Now this language is actually called DAX. It's not dissimilar to like standard Excel functions in many ways, although it's a lot more powerful, but a lot of the functions are basically the same. And then I'm going to open a bracket there and it's going to say what column do I want to sum, and I'm actually going to sum the value column of my output report data. So that's that. Okay, and then I'll give it a decimal number with no decimal places, I think, and use the 1000 separator. Hit OK on that. All right, so that's our first measure. So we're now going to create some measures for the actual, the budget, and the variance. If I do actuals first, so let's just do a new measure here. And we're going to use a new function called calculate. And it's very similar to the function called filter in Excel. Basically, you create an expression. In this case, it's just going to be the value that I want to filter, and then how I want to filter it. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see this. So we're actually, if we start typing total, you can actually use measures we've already created inside these measures. So calculate a total, but this time we're going to filter it by the value type. You can see I'm just using arrows and tabs where the value type equals actual. And I'm going to make that a number again, decimal number, no decimal places, with 1000 separator. So now I've created that actual one. If I go back into the management module here, you'll see I forgot to name it, but it doesn't matter because it's called it measure 1, and I can edit it in here and I can call that actual. And I'm going to cut it, just Control X and Control V and put it there. I'll make that a bit wider. So I've got an actual value here, which is just filtering everything in that column by the actual. So if I copy that now, Control C, Control V, you'll see it says copy of actual. I'm just going to change it to say budget, change that to say the filter to say budget. Now we have a budget one. And then lastly, I'm just going to make a new one for variance there, and variance. So we now have a total, an actual, a budget, and a variance. I'm just going to show you roughly how you work with these before we start messing about and creating some of the actual report measures that we need. So you can just close that. I'm going to do this by opening up a new tab, and on the insert menu on pivot table, you can see we have an option to insert from the data model. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to put that there like that. I'm just going to close that queries and connection thing there, roll over the pivot table thing. You can see that we've got these little orange icons here show that something is inside the data model, and those are the ones we want to be using. Now, current month, all we've got is a field called current month, so we don't need that at the moment. We haven't done anything with that. But in our output report data, you can see here are our new measures that we've created. And these are essentially values, so I can drop these into the values here. So I can create actual, budget, and variance. And then I could put things like, for example, the product category as a row. And I've essentially got an instant table of variances here. But of course I could, swap this for anything. So I could put region in there. I can even swap it around like that. And I've basically got a whole load of slicing and dicing that I can do now and create instant sort of variance reports just with those 3 measures alone there. We're not going to do that now because we're actually trying to create this report here in this sort of format for the moment before we go on and do something really flash. So now we've created our value type measures, we need to actually create our report measures. What I want to do essentially is create measures for the actual for the month, budget for the month, variance for the month, same for all three of those for the year to date, and then the balance budget and the balance per month. So essentially all the report headings as individual measures. And that will give us immense flexibility because we can slice and dice that. We can put them into charts and graphs and dashboards and everything once they're created. The way I'm going to do that first off is I'm going to create the first one in the measures window. I'm going to call this month actual. For this, we're going to use the calculate option again, and this time the expression. So we can use one of our other expressions that we've just created, which is actuals. So we're going to filter the actuals. And where are we going to filter it? We're going to filter it to our value period. So where our value period is equal to the month. We can check the formula there, no errors. So we can give it a number, format, no decimal places, hit OK. So that gives us that one. So we can drop into a pivot table now. You can see it's here. We can drop those values in and just check that they look vaguely sensible, which they kind of do. But now we can create a shortcut by going into the manage window, and you can see it's created the measure there. Now I'm just going to move it over here just for simplicity. Drag that up. So we've got our month actual. So I click on that and copy and paste that underneath. We get an identical copy. And this time, I just change that to say budget, bud, and this to say budget, and hit enter. We've now got our budget measure, and I'll do exactly the same for our variance measure by changing all the mentions of the word budget to the mention to say variance. So that's those three for the month. Now you can see that by copying these and changing that to say year to date, we can get a year to date actual, identically, exactly the same method, copy and paste that to create a budget year to date, etc., etc. So let me just do that quickly. Right, so now we've got the first 6 columns of the report essentially. If we look back at the report, you can see we now need the budget balance and the budget per month. Now, in order to work out the per month, we're going to need to know how many months we got remaining. We need to essentially create some date type measures. So we go in the manage window again. You can see the current month, because we pulled it into a data model, is in here as a one-line table. And it'd be nice if we could just refer to that table and it would pick it up. But we need a measure to give us that exact same value. And so we can auto sum that column. And it's called it sum of current month, but we don't need to do that. So we can just call it current month. Which will give us a number there. And then months to go. So we can just say equals, just typing straight in the box here up there, 12 minus current month. That measure there, which is in this case 7. All right. So then if we go back here, we can now create a measure for the balance and the balance per month, referring to these other measures. Now, incidentally, having all these measures come, cascade down from other measures and they're all linked and mentioning each other is an excellent idea, actually, because we can, if we change something in one place, it will cascade through. So, for example, if I divide that total by 1,000, you can see instantly all of my other measures, because they're all cascading down from that, will divide by 1,000. So it can be very useful. And incidentally, even if I change the name of the total, which they're all based, to say total in thousands and divide by 1,000, for example, you can see it still all works because it changes the name everywhere that it's picked up. So I'll just undo that. So let's create one for the balance, which is going to be the budget balance, essentially. So we might as well copy one of the original budget measures and say this is balance the budget. And we're going to calculate that as the budget. And instead of year to date, we'll just say balance. Right. So in other words, where the value type says balance. We could just check. Sorry, not the value type. The value period says balance. And now for our balance per month, we're going to say that it equals the balance budget divided by the months to go. Okay, and because it's a brand new measure, we didn't copy it from anywhere else. We need to set the format manually. So if we just go to more formats, decimal number with no decimal places, and they're all in the same format. So we can close that now. Let's go back to the pivot report. I just put those measures in one at a time here, and we can see them populating. And essentially now what we have is all of our measures in here, the same as we had on this original report. And if I, instead of product category, I'll just change that to region, we can, create these sort of drill down type reports and stuff. And not only that, when we go in here, if we can go back to a previous month for March, we can refresh the data. And we can see that it all changes and updates to that month. But what we desperately need to do now is make it look a damn sight better than it does right now, because what we're actually trying to do is impress people with our newfound skills. So I have numerous videos on how to make pivot tables look good. So I'm going to kind of rush through this a bit because that's not what this video is about. But essentially, you want to make use of the tools that you've got at your disposal already with pivot tables. So pick a style that's pretty close to the kind of thing that you might want to look at. So let's just pick that, for example. That doesn't look too bad. And then we can do things like put subtotals at the bottom of each group and maybe put a blank row in as well. We'll collapse a couple of these at least. One kind of hack, if you like, that I like to do is introduce a new measure, which is actually just a blank column. And then we can insert some sort of breakup columns in these reports. And so the easy way to do that is if we go back to Power Pivot and do new measure, and this one, if we just call it spacer and we just make it equal to 0, right? No decimal places if we like. So we now have something called spacer, and it's put it at the end here. But what we want to do is we want to drag that to wherever we want our spacer. So we want one there. But on our menu here, we can drag multiple versions of measures in. So we'll just drag another one in and then move that to where we want. So first off, we need to get rid of these zeros. So if we open up the very top one here, right click on it and go to value field settings and then click on number format. We can create a custom number format. And if we just put 3 semicolons, what it essentially does is it says that positive, negative numbers and zeros will all show as nothing. We hit OK there, and you can see that that disappears. We do exactly the same thing here. In fact, we can just go to number format. We've got our custom number format ready there, and we've got rid of that. Now what we need to do is get rid of the word spacer. And the way we can get around that is we can change the field name by putting, say, a certain amount of spaces. So if we put here, we'll go for maybe say 5 spaces there. And on this one, we'll go for 6. Now, when we refresh the table, we have like smaller gaps. Now you can experiment with those gaps. And of course, you can rename all of these fields any way you want, as long as you don't give them the same name as a current measure or field in the pivot table, it'll be fine. One of the things that I think perhaps ought to do is get rid of the region out of the report at the moment and put that as a slicer. Over here, if we go to the region field, right click on it, add as a slicer. Where is it put it? It's put it over here somewhere. But we can play with that by going to the slicer menu, changing the number of columns. I'd say change it to something like that. I think we probably need to insert another row here. Now we can make it grey, make it into one of our grey formats, like say that one. And you can see now we've got a report that we can filter by region, or we can just leave it as the grand total and show product categories. What else can we do to make it look better? Well, we can turn off grid lines, which is a standard thing on the view menu here. So turn that off. And also that slicer, if we want, we can duplicate it if we say format no border, I know I'm rushing through this, but there is an entire video I cover all of this on if you want to go and look at it. Hit OK. And then when you pick that format there, we've knocked the rows off and we've got something that says March sales report. We can filter it by region there. We can fix things like instead of saying autofit, we can untick that and hit OK. And that way things will sort of steady out really when we click different regions. Now, let's put some conditional format on it. Now, there's quite a nice easy one. If we go to conditional formatting and put some color scales on it, so this one, for example, you'll see instantly you get a little box there which you can click down on, and we say we want to show that on all values. And we could do the same on here. I'd like to pick that one. But actually, it's better if we go into manage these rules here and edit them so that 0 rather than the midpoint is where they change color. And if you change the midpoint to a number, it will default to 0, so you can hit OK, and you can do that on the other one as well. Apply those, and now anything with sales above budget is going to be green and below budget is going to be red. Perhaps we can get really flash with the balance per month, and we can highlight it if the balance per month is greater than the sales we achieved last month. In other words, it doesn't look like we're going to hit our end of year budget sales. So one of the ways we could do that is we'll say we want it on every row, but we're going to use a formula. And this, we've got to be a little bit careful. So we need to have been on the top right cell in the pivot table there. Well, not the top right cell, but the top cell of that column before we set this formula. And we need to basically say that if that is greater than the monthly actual, then we want a format. But what we need to do is get rid of the dollars signs in front of the row number so it applies equally to every row. So the format I'm going to do, I'm just going to fill it with a light yellow kind of warning at the moment. That's fine. And so you can see that these ones are highlighting as potentially dangerous cells here. And the great thing about this is, of course, it all works when you start doing your filters. So I think we've got a great little report there. We can update it to the latest month's data, hit refresh, and everything should change pretty much instantly. We've got our new report. If we now add in the rest of the orders, so these new orders come in, I go copy, and this is how quick it could be at month end. I'm going to paste that onto the bottom of the actuals table there, and then I'm going to go back to my sheet here, and I'm going to put in, say, month 10, refresh it, and all my order data is going to be pulled in, and I get brand new reports for October in an instant like that. Okay, so it might look a bit better and it's a bit more flash and you've got some various different options there, but what else can you do with this data now it's in a data model? Glad you asked, because this is where it really comes into its own. So if we had a new sheet here, we could create things like instant pivot charts. So if we go to the insert menu here and on pivot chart, we'll say pivot chart. It says, what do you want to use? And as long as we put this workbook's data model, so we'll hit OK there. You could say we've got all our pivot field charts here. So we'll pick our report data. What are we going to report? Well, why don't we report here actuals as values and budgets as values. Now notice I've picked actuals and budgets rather than month actuals and month budgets. And the reason for that is because we can now use month as our axes here. And you can see, although this is a bit sort of pants as you right now, you can see we're getting our monthly data all the way up through here for budgets and actuals. And now we can put things like slices for the product category. So by product category, we can now look at the sales by month against budget by product category, but it looks a bit messy. So let's tidy it up really quickly. If we go to the pivot chart analyze ribbon, you can get rid of the field buttons by hitting hide all. So it looks much more like a normal chart. And then we can go to the design menu of charts. We can hover over any of these to see if we like them. That one looks quite good. We can change the color schemes, so perhaps something like that might be better. Move things like the legend around by saying we want it at the top, for example. Bold the axes. I mean, there's all manner of things you can do with these charts. And now we have like an instant sort of dashboard here. And you could argue, well, actually, we don't want product category. We insert a slicer for the region. And there we have regional sales charts versus budget. So I just wanted to give you a flavor for the kind of things that you can create once your data is in a data model and how quickly you can slice and dice the data and come up with brand new reports that, let's face it, look fantastic compared with your original traditional looking sales report. You can download this spreadsheet. It's complete. You can follow through, look at the measures, look in detail if you get stuck or anything. So good luck, have fun, look forward to putting your feet up at period end at the same time as impressing all your peers and your boss. See you soon.